This is a party that has spoken out against the province's actions to respond to Donald Trump's attacks on our economy, that has brought in far-right YouTubers into our legislature and anti-choice organizations into the legislature.
Rather than feeling defeated and hopeless, I think it's about time that we cut the grass and expose the snakes. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Overopinionated. Subscribe, follow, like, share, comment your thoughts down below. And it turns out the power of the people is actually quite strong. And I will show you exactly why, because it looks like conservatives just won again, though I'm sure the Liberals will continue to pat themselves on the back for all the hard work they're doing. We have a lot of stuff to get through today, including some absolute unhinged nonsense that I just cannot wait to go ahead and fact check, because apparently the reporters covering these stories just cannot be bothered. All that and more coming up today on Overopinionated.
Canada Day is around the corner. And over the last few months, Canadians have been having an important conversation about our national sovereignty. For the most part, that's been focused on economics and the changing global economic landscape. But there's an important conversation to be had about Canadian identity, values, and culture, and what strengthens and unites us as a people. In Quebec, our Francophone brothers and sisters have been having that conversation for a long time. They've been having that discussion about Quebec identity and its importance to social cohesion and integration. I think it's time for all Canadians to participate in that conversation. Who are we? What does it mean to be Canadian? And what do we mean when we say we want newcomers to integrate into Canadian society?
Isn't it rather bizarre to have a country that's been around as long as Canada has, and to be asking yourself those questions right now? Because it does seem like we actually don't know. For half the population, being Canadian means that, you know, you're kind, you respect law, you obey the law, you'll go above and beyond for your neighbors. You want a family, you want a good life, you work hard, and you live a great life as a result of it. That you encourage people to be the best of each other. You're known around the globe as being the kind Canada. You know, nobody ever picks a fight with Canada because that's just kind of our reputation up until recently. And then for the other half of the population, being Canadian means that you're not American. And that's apparently enough, I guess, for your cultural identity. But on top of how insane it is to even ask that question, like, you don't have to ask Italians, what does it mean to be Italian? They know. You don't have to ask people in Poland, what does it mean to be Polish? They know. You certainly don't have to ask Americans that. But with Canada, I think a lot of us were actually quite naive, or perhaps because we were coming out of a conservative government that lasted nearly a decade and life was doing okay. There was a lot of people who were pretty fed up with Harper at the end of his tenure, but overall life was okay. You know, you could still afford to do things, you liked things, whatever. People wanted weed legalized, I guess, and so then they voted for Justin Trudeau.
Canadians are incredibly proud of being Canadian. One of the ways we define ourselves most easily is, well, we're not American.
But I do think that when Trudeau uttered the statements of, you know, Canada being a post-national identity nation, a lot of people were upset about that. It seemed insulting, but I don't think enough people really understood what that comment meant, because you have to really listen to these people to really get a grasp of what is the message behind their words.
We can nostalgically look back and long for the old order to somehow return, or we can build a new one with purpose and partnership.
Somewhere along the way, and I think a lot of us know where that was, our identity was sold off. It was rebranded and diluted into something very hollow. And over time, these things work and they begin to completely change the way that you think and feel and see. Not to mention that we also have a number of bills that actually do legitimately change all of those things in terms of censorship and control. And, you know, they called it that, you know, Canada's a cultural melting pot. This is a good thing. It's a kind thing. And a lot of us were fine with that because it was managed relatively well for the first couple of decades. And then all of a sudden, it became evidently clear to those people who were seeking an answer for why they felt differently than how they were told we should feel. And it was governed by global narratives and elites. We were told that erasing tradition was inclusion. Not having Christmas concerts anymore was a good thing because it was nice and kind. And some people started to eat that up, and other people kind of started to have some alarm bells going off because they weren't totally sucked into the vacuum yet. We were told that obedience was a virtue, that questioning authority made you dangerous, and to even think so much as to question the authority meant that you were a fringe minority. You were far right. You were an extremist. There was something wrong with you for even so much as wondering what that other side was going off about. And in that vacuum that many people got sucked into, and some of us still do when it comes to certain topics, they fed us nothing but contradictions. We celebrate free speech, Canada strong and free, but only the kind that is approved by the state. We defend democracy, but we never ever challenge the party in power. And if you do, you're a bad person, even though that's democratic, isn't it? You got to trust the science, unless, of course, the science questions the plan. And you have to champion tolerance while also branding your neighbor as a bigot for thinking differently. The liberal governments in Canada for decades built an entire identity around selective outrage and media-fueled fear, and it really worked. We became a nation that now shames you for wanting freedom, mocks you for expecting competence, and labels you far right, and just drags your name through the mud, isolates you, defenestrates you for remembering how good Canada used to be and wanting to go back to that place, because it is possible. It really is. And now we have liberals who walk around thinking that they're morally superior for parroting every single freaking elitist talking point handed out to them, whether that be from climate policy to censorship to whatever the hell the CBC spins that day. They think they're so gosh darn smart for literally regurgitating a headline, brainwashed not by facts, but by feelings, and addicted to the hand that feeds them without even asking the obvious question, which is, if I work a full-time job in one of the wealthiest countries on earth, why the hell do I need to be fed at all? And that's not compassion, that is dependence, and it is done by design. A divided, dependent population does not rise up. It kneels, grateful to the very same people who are handing them that carbon rebate check. And that is exactly what a post-national reality is. There is no past, there is no pride, and there is no power. Suddenly, the Canadian identity became obsessed with identity, politics, climate, symbolism, censorship, and institutional control. And they also weaponized public health. They weaponized climate and race narratives to consolidate power and also to silence people who were critics. And then later turns out everything they said was absolutely true. They also bought off the media. That was a big one with Bill C-18, Bill C-11, and some of the influence the CRTC had there too, regulated speech and treated dissent as extremism. They really did do that. I mean, listen to David Eby talking just this week.
This is a party that has spoken out against the province's actions to respond to Donald Trump's attacks on our economy, that has brought in far-right YouTubers into our legislature and anti-choice organizations into the legislature. This is a group of people that includes climate deniers, residential schools deniers. The far-right politics of this group are extreme, and no matter who is leading them, they're going to face significant challenges. I think the contrast is pretty stark for British Columbians. If they want stability, if they want government that is committed to their priorities and delivering for them, whether it's growing the economy or strong public services or safe communities, if they want a group of politicians that are not continually attacking each other and making criminal allegations against each other, then obviously it's the BC NDP that they should be looking to for that. The contrast is quite stark. And we're going to stay focused on people moving forward. The Conservatives will do what they're doing right now.
Now, yes, I know that David Eby is technically an NDP. Doesn't fit the definition, though. So, yeah, he is a far left liberal indeed. Also, yes, there's a lot of drama happening amidst the Conservative Party in that province. Welcome to being a conservative where you think and you have a voice and an opinion. That's kind of, what we do. Outside of that, though, there's so much. I can't even, the amount of disinformation in there, which I thought they hated, but wow, they use it every day. I have, first and foremost, honestly, the biggest point from my takeaway here is I've actually never once heard anybody in the conservative side of things say that, deny residential schools. I think everybody agrees that, yep, they sure did exist. The thing that many people disagree with, though, and deny is the same thing that the Liberal government cut funding for, which I'm not going to repeat on camera, but why would they cut funding for that if it was actually true? I don't know. And all of the other things, too. I mean, look at how many insults he had there, just this morally superior high ground. And it makes you wonder, why did the Liberals go so far left? Why would they do that? And the answer is actually quite simple, because power, real unaccountable technocratic power, lies in global governance, not national elections. The most important factor of all those things is that identity-based coalitions vote very predictably.
I want to be very clear. We can prove that every federal government, from Mr. Mulroney to Mr. Trudeau, have been compromised by agents of the Communist China. Every government were informed at one point or another. Every government choose to ignore CISU's warning either by negligence, self-interest, or partisanship. Every government were infiltrated by agents of influence acting on behalf.
But when you control the media and you control the narrative and you're routinely on camera saying Pierre Poilievre doesn't have his security clearance, people don't pay attention to the reality of that. People don't pay attention. They don't care. There's no outrage when there is a Chinese Communist Party member of the Liberal government who's running, who was a cop, that you've just forgiven, even though he threatened another party member from the Conservative side who has a bounty on his head in Hong Kong because he speaks out about the regime. Nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. And you can say, security clearance, what are you hiding? Even though you have a candidate, Pierre Poilievre, who has never had any crazy scandals under his belt, as far as I can tell. If there are some that I'm missing, please send them my way. I will make a correction. But he has never had anything. And Elections Canada then goes and does these internal reviews. Again, it's that centralized power. And they say there's nothing to see here. There was over 16,000 complaints from towards Elections Canada, and their commissioner just declared that there's no evidence of foreign interference that affected the 2025 federal election, even though investigations aren't done and complaints filed were much higher than normal. The site task force did indeed confirm that China ran an information op on WeChat to boost Mark Carney, and also to boost Mark Carney during the federal election, and then to boost Mark Carney inadvertently by criticizing Chrystia Freeland during the Liberal leadership race. The amount of rhetoric around, started by Justin Trudeau, of Russia, Russian foreign interference. You know what I thought was really interesting too, and this again just goes to show the global dominance of narrative and what's going on here. And we didn't talk about this on the show, but in France, when their President Macron, who he was pushed in the face by his wife, dad. And the first response from the Elysee Palace was, that's Russian misinformation. And then journalists had to say, no, it's not actually, because we saw that. It's all over the news. Obviously, you guys haven't seen it. And then they made a quick correction and said, we were just play fighting. Yeah, we were just play fighting. But the first response from them was Russian misinformation. And that was something that the Trudeau government did. And Mark Carney very much continued that throughout the election campaign. Isn't it kind of weird how you never hear about Pierre Poilievre's security clearance now, all of a sudden? Very odd, isn't it? And the reason why is because that was a talking point. It was a non-issue. It was nothing. And they knew that, and they said it anyway because they have the media control. They knew it would be in the headlines. They knew it would be very hard for Poilievre to try to bounce back from that one, even though it was a non-issue. Case in point, by all of the very real issues of foreign interference and threats and bad things that have happened within the Trudeau government, and ministers having to recuse themselves from certain terror organizations because of conflicts of interest by being involved with them. Obviously, security clearance doesn't matter an awful lot here in Canada. But the real question is, it's not, did it happen? I think the real question should be, why are they so eager to convince us that it didn't? And why are they so eager to convince us that the world is becoming more dangerous and divided, that it's a hinge moment for our country and Canada is ready to lead? This comment, it was so good, from Melanie in Saskatchewan on X. She says, I don't know if it's your fake smug superiority complex or your incessant use of the words catalyst and hinge, or catalyze and hinge. She says, I don't know if it's your fake smug superiority complex or your incessant use of the words catalyze and hinge, but do cork it. In fact, tell everyone about your second bookmark. What's the holdup with The Hinge? Time to build an even better Canada. You announced this grand vision for Canada's future, hyping it as a pivotal blueprint for navigating global chaos, yet here we are, months past the promised May 2025 release, with nothing but a vague July 1st placeholder and your name half erased from publisher listings. Were you too busy chasing the Liberal Party leadership to finish editing? Or is this delay just a tactic to keep us from guessing your big plan that nobody gave you a mandate for? Canada is waiting. I also have to say, I was on the phone with my gal pal Kelsey Sharon this morning, and I was actually, while we were on the phone, I was reading Mark Carney's book Values out loud to her, some sections in it that are deeply concerning, and it hit me that Mark Carney uses the word values a lot. And I think it's kind of funny because his book is called Values, right? And now we hear him using the word hinge like almost every day, multiple times a day. It is so flippin' annoying. And his next book is called The Hinge. And I seriously think he's doing that for PR so that it gets better reach in like algorithms and searches, because it's stuff that he says so frequently so that people are more inclined to find his book. Because if you like Mark Carney, value, it goes hand in hand in every single speech. That's just a weird little side note. And even now, the ideology of these far left radicals in our government, these far left activists in our government, is that Donald Trump is the problem and conservatives are bad because they're criticizing how they're responding to Donald Trump. But in reality, Donald Trump is not the problem. This is the problem.
Repeal C-69, repeal C-48, repeal C-50. Send a clear message to the private sector and foreign investment that Canada is truly open for business, that we are serious about getting these projects built. The Supreme Court, as my colleague from Alberta said earlier, that C-69 is unconstitutional, yet they refused to repeal it. And as a result of C-69, 16 major energy projects have been abandoned, worth more than $600 billion. And 18 LNG projects were proposed by 2015, and only one remains viable, LNG Canada. And that project, Madam Speaker, is only proceeding because it was granted exemptions by the Liberal government to C-69 and the carbon tax. Meanwhile, some of our most trusted allies, Japan, Germany, Ukraine, Poland, South Korea, came to Canada asking for LNG. They want Canadian energy that's clean, affordable, and sustainable. But nonsensical policies and a decision by the Liberal government forced those countries, our important allies, to go somewhere else.
And sure, David Eby and other liberals and extremists in his position can go ahead and say all they want, that conservatives are the problem. But in reality, when it comes to Canada's security, prosperity, sustainability, and longevity, this is also the truth.
It just came out that Prime Minister Carney gave $1 billion of your taxpayer money to a Chinese state-owned company. And as you may know, in China, there's no such thing as a private sector company. It all goes back to the communist regime of Beijing. So Canadians now know that Carney used the Canada Infrastructure Bank to give the communist regime $1 billion to build ferries in China for use in British Columbia. That's your money sent straight to Beijing. It doesn't create any jobs in Canada or benefits for Canadians at all. But let's not forget, Carney himself said China is Canada's biggest security threat. Even Freeland expressed her great consternation and disappointment with the deal. Look, that money could have been used to be able to cut your taxes, to fight crime, or to help unleash Canadian industry here at home by hiring a Canadian company to do the job. Now, don't forget, Prime Minister Carney, back before the election, he met with a Beijing-linked group earlier in the year, and in fact, his old firm, Brookfield, the one he used to run, and while he ran it, holds billions of dollars in risky, politically sensitive deals tied to the Chinese Communist regime. It really makes you wonder why he still hasn't disclosed his financial assets to you yet, doesn't it? The reality is Prime Minister Carney attacks Canadian industry and workers at home, but helps Beijing burn more coal, buy up critical resources, and tighten its grip, its chokehold on Canada's supply chains, all while China expands its foreign interference in Canada. That doesn't sound like a Prime Minister who works for you, does it? And whatever happened to elbows up?
So why is it that Mark Carney is obsessed with hinge crises? He talks about them every day. Why are the Liberals, NDP included, so obsessed with slandering and defaming conservative voices? Because they use data and evidence against them. They don't ever respond back with facts to contradict what conservative points are. They call you names. And then all of the other very weak-minded people who are just in that herd mentality way of thinking join in and call you names too. Why is it that they don't want to open up our resources? Why? And I know that this can feel overwhelming and sad and stressful and like you just want to get the heck out of here. But there is a lot of hope, and the power in the people is incredibly real. You know, just a few days ago, the Liberals doubled down on their electric vehicle mandate, which is horrible. So horrible. And now it's come out that there's pressure building on Liberals to rethink their electric vehicle mandate. So the Conservatives have once again won, not by insulting anybody, but by telling the truth. Wherever you put your hard-earned savings, a bank, an RRSP, or the stock market, find out whether it is being managed towards net zero. Ask if your financial institution is part of GFANZ. If not, why not? Are the people investing your money missing out on major opportunities? GFANZ, of course, is his company, of which most major banks have all pulled out of because it is a total sham and has robbed them blind. I'll read you this other part here that I just also thought was something to think about when it comes to Mark Carney and why he's doing what he's doing. It's pretty clear, but by living the values of sustainability, resilience, and responsibility in tackling climate change, you will inspire others, just as Canadians have during COVID. And collectively, these efforts are helping to shift market values. That is it for me today. I'm Jasmine Lane. Thank you so much for watching Overopinionated. Again, subscribe, follow, like, share, comment your thoughts down below. And make sure you're listening tomorrow because my interview with Premier Danielle Smith goes live at about 2:30 Central Time.